Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our Zoom meeting. Hello, my name is Jen Tan, and I am from the Bio-Pacific Toastmasters Club. Welcome to this session, Having Difficult Conversations with Positive Feedback by Susan Schwarz. This webinar is being recorded, so please by turning on your camera or asking questions, you consent to being recorded, and by District 4's option shared on District 4's YouTube channel. As a courtesy, please mute yourself and turn off your camera. You will have the opportunity to unmute and turn on your camera to applaud at the end of the webinar. Please enable Zoom's hide non-video participants setting as described in the slide now. To enable this in Zoom, click the arrow next to the Start Video button in the lower left-hand corner of your Zoom window. This will open the video settings. Please check the Hide non-video participants checkbox. Once you have this set up, you can use the reaction function in the lower right-hand corner and select thumbs up to indicate you have adjusted the Zoom setting. I'll give everyone a moment to do so. All right, then later you'll have the opportunity to ask questions via the public chat. Please limit comments in the public chat to questions for and responses to the speaker. Please feel free to raise your question anytime during the speaker's presentation, and I will monitor the chat box. Now, let me introduce our wonderful speaker today, Susan Schwarz. Susan Schwarz has led a variety of corporate and government teams through organizational change and technology transformation. She equips subject matter experts with communication and relationship building skills to become world-class managers. Her change toolbox combines emotional intelligence, Lego serious play, and knowledge sharing methods. In addition to authoring, Creating a Greater Whole, a project manager's guide to becoming a leader, she's also an adjunct instructor at UC Berkeley and UC Santa Cruz. I'm going to pass the mic to Susan and welcome her for this excellent session on having difficult conversations with positive feedback. Susan?
Thank you. Let me just get set up very quickly over here. I really wish having a difficult conversation was, I won't say as easy as telling a story, but it's real life. And that's what makes it somewhat harder to manage and to have happen. So during this session, as I go back to full screen, technology is not totally there with us yet. Thank you for your patience. So as I was saying, you know, having difficult conversations are tough, and they come in different flavors and different situations. Some are very small and some are huge and very complex. And so this morning, we're going to talk about what kind of conversations just, you know, they're the ones, how I define it, is it just grabs your insides and you just feel stressed. And even thinking about having them, you just almost shut down. You don't want to deal with it for a variety of reasons. And we'll talk about how to take that, figure out what is the real problem, and then move forward. And I like to say turning a D conversation difficult into an A conversation action-based so that it really can have positive outcomes. Now, this quote by Seth Godin, I feel is so pertinent because at the bottom of every difficult conversation, often people call it a misunderstanding. It's not really a misunderstanding. It is having a different perspective. And just because you think you're right and the other person must be wrong, I'm sure the other person thinks they're right and you are totally wrong. It's a matter of perspective. You're both going towards the same goal, but you're approaching it from two different angles. And so that's really the first step, is to figure out, what are you avoiding? Why are you putting that conversation off? Is it because you're afraid of conflict? Or maybe you're afraid that they'll show some emotion. They might yell at you. They might cry. What is it that they'll do? You know, they might even throw something. There's lots of reasons to be fearful. And sometimes people will take what you're saying the wrong way. You really meant to be kind and be positive, and they just took it the wrong way. Sometimes it's as simple as an apology, and sometimes it's going to take you a lot longer to get them to see that you meant something different, and that's scary. And then one of the ones I see most often, and what really gets me stressed, is when people are only looking at the surface, kind of like an iceberg. You know, what do you see above the water? So let's just solve the easy problem. But they never get down to the real problem. And when you think about an iceberg, you know, what sank the Lusitania? It wasn't the beautiful peak that you saw, it was what was underneath. And so how many of you have had that experience of just feeling just so stressed? Go ahead and in the participants window, you know, give me a thumbs up or a hand raise. Have any of you just felt that tension based on one of those? There I go, no ums at Toastmasters. If any of you, you know, just felt that way, can I see some thumbs up? I see a few. A hand raise? Excellent, excellent. You know, it happens, it's normal, and we're human, and that's what goes on. And the reason why it's so important to handle the risk is because of the consequences. And if you look at, it may be smaller in scale or larger, whether it's one-on-one, one person to one, or many to many, or one to many. You're going to waste a lot of time dealing with or postponing that conversation because you can't move forward. You can't resolve an issue that no one is willing to deal with. And one of those challenges is playing dead. I'm sure many of you have worked with somebody, of course it's never been you, who are very quiet when you're trying to discuss an issue and resolve that issue. And then when bad things happen, that person stands up and said, I knew it. I knew that would happen. And you go, well, then why didn't you say something? And they go, because nobody asked. Have any of you run into that situation? Give me a thumbs up or a hand wave. Nobody. Yes, I see that. Let me go ahead and, can I get to, yes, I can. So the next one would be really ambiguous expectations. How many of you have ever worked with a manager who said, this is what we need to do, and I trust you all to do a great job? And then they come back and you've done it all wrong, and they're the only ones that can fix it, so they do it themselves. So how do you deal with that situation? How do you say before they leave, can you explain this better? How do you say, well, you didn't tell us what you wanted? So those ambiguous situations can make things happen. Or the elephant in the room that nobody is willing to talk about or deal with. And the challenge is that magnified risk, not only does it happen when each of these 4 areas are not addressed, on the other hand, sometimes people may not want to think about the worst case. What happens if we have a pandemic? How do you prepare for that risk? If you live on the coast, you need to know about hurricanes and tidal waves and be ready to go. You know, here in San Francisco, everybody has a go bag for that earthquake that can come. So it's really a matter of taking a step back, taking that deep breath, and addressing or trying to address each of these different circumstances. Does anybody have a consequence that we haven't addressed that you wanted to share in chat? Jenin, do we have any additional thoughts?
Susan, I don't see comments in the chat box.
Okay, well then it looks like we covered
We
it.
just got one.
Oh, good.
One consequence is not deepening relationship.
Absolutely. And when you don't deepen that relationship, that is a great entree. When you don't allow that relationship to deepen, it very often could be because you don't trust that relationship. And if any of these other 5 consequences happen, it all results in lower trust. And the challenge about losing trust is it often takes 2 to 4 times the amount of effort to regain that trust. And that goes back to wasting a lot of time, magnifying the risk. All of these, again, is exponential. So if we start back and we start to look at difficult conversations as a story, when you start to prepare that story, like we just learned previously, you need to pull it apart. You need to comb through to find out what is that essence. Think about what is really bothering you. It's not the tip of the iceberg, it's somewhere underneath. It's what sunk the Lusitania. And then, does it impact anybody else but you? Is this at your, or is it an issue with everybody? You got to, and what is the impact? How big is that impact? And that's when you need to frame it. You take that deeper dive under. And a good way to start to frame that is to take everything you learned in that root cause development and write it down. 3 or 4 sentences that identify what you're feeling, who is impacted, and what could be the consequences. Once you have it written down, you can take a look at it and say, oh, that's not what I meant. Or I haven't addressed X. Or it might be that it's not even worth pursuing. So that writing it down, editing it, bringing it into a focus, what is really needs to be addressed? What is the absolute challenge that that difficult conversation will address? Then list what are the potential outcomes if you have that conversation or if you don't have that conversation. You know, do 2 sides of a piece of paper. And then as part of your framing conversation with yourself, identify what you don't want to happen. Cross them off the list, and then you're able to move forward into the next arena and take that action plan, move it forward, just like breaking up that iceberg. And once you have the opportunities that are positive, look at them, prioritize them, and decide what exactly do you want to happen. And that way you can focus your conversation. Think about, you know, a small problem one-on-one, you're going to go through this process fairly quickly. If you're many to many, you may need to think about who can help you achieve that goal. Even one-on-one, you may want to consider that step. And then you need to have an action plan to move forward. When is a good time to address that difficult conversation? Often a difficult conversation catches you off guard. And the person providing that hot button, that impetus to you, really wants to have you be in public and go blah, 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 blah. So, be prepared, say, that is really an excellent thought. I'm going to need to noodle on it just a bit. Let's make an appointment for next week. And then you've built yourself some time to develop your story, to figure things out, to make that roadmap happen. So, why don't we go into chat? And are there any ways that you found, any tools? All of you are very experienced managers and people, and I'm sure you've all had difficult conversations. Have you had a technique that's worked really well with you when you're trying to determine a path forward and thinking about who can help you achieve that goal forward?
So Susan, let's give people a minute to put in a chat what tools they use to break up the iceberg. But I did saw some questions related to the last part to your previous slides. So one question is, when you talk about someone shutting down, what words should we watch out for to prevent someone from shutting down?
Well, very often, that comes back to creating a safe space and listening actively and letting them know that you want to listen to their perspective, that you are very interested, that you want to create a win-win situation. Often they'll relax and be a little more open, and you have to start with small, gentle steps. And it's a matter of building trust one moment at a time. I think if you use your active listening tools and allow them the chance to let their voice be heard, you'll be very, very successful. I always go back to what our mothers told us: you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, so you should listen twice as much as you talk, as you speak. And that way, very much, if they're worried that you'll take what they say the wrong way, or they're worried that you might yell at them, that gives them time to build up a trust and create that trusting relationship with you.
Great, thank you, Susan. So we have many responses in the chat box about the techniques that could be used. Marlo mentioned humor. Laura mentioned speak about something you already agree with. Joyce responded, allowing the other person to speak about their own feelings too. And Sarah responded, approaching the subject with compassion, being optimistic that the other person has good intentions. Jay responded, one possibility would be approaching the other person and asking, how do you think we can resolve this situation? Let the other person know you are interested in their point of view. And Barry responded, know when to involve others in your approach and clearly define what you hope they will bring to the table. So I think the common theme here is actively listen to what the other person's point of view and be respectful in listening to them.
And respect, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you summarized, and I know that was part of many other people's suggestion. I honestly think respecting, going back to the question that I was asked prior, if people feel that you respect them and respect their opinion and want to really understand their different perspective, you're going to get a tremendous response. When you don't feel respected, or I know when I don't, I shut down, I feel angry, I just see negative, and very difficult for me to see anything positive or want to contribute to their effort in any way. And that goes on to the next step, which is, how do you create that roadmap? What are you going to do? How will you prepare to have that difficult conversation once you realize what is the challenge and who you can help, who you can bring in, exactly like the comment you just read. What are the roles? And not only what are the roles, what are they going to do on stage? What is their role in continuing our story forward? And this is the next step when you are building that plan, is it can happen depending on the complexity and how much trust you need to build. Positive feedback is an iterative process. It's building trust one step at a time. And I love this Mona Lisa perspective because it's iterative means you do a little bit, you take a look at what you like, what didn't work, you go on to the next step where you start to fill in the color base, and then you rinse and repeat. And all of a sudden, when you start to highlight and you get the details and you've got buy-in from everybody, you've got this beautiful outcome that was based on everybody participating, working within that feedback loop, being respectful of the process and using their creativity to get beyond that challenge. So why don't we move on to the next step, please? I'm the please. So as we prepare for this difficult conversation, there are 3 more steps. And we've already covered purpose and priority. What is the conversation you want to have? What is really important to you? What's not important to you? And the third one we need to spend a little bit of time on, and that's empathy. Again, many of your suggestions in the chat box did reflect empathy. So here we have the symbolism. We've got that beautiful growing plant at the top that still needs, it's still weak, it still needs some strength, although underneath it has this incredible tangle of roots. So as you move forward and you start to try to look at things from the other person's perspective, part of your story, what's going to build your story, is understanding what fears and threats the other person or the other group of people want to protect. And the more information you have, the stronger the conversation, the stronger collaboration you can bring, because you're going to be able to ask the right questions. You can direct the conversation to let them know that you understand and you want to get a win-win situation. So I talk about competitive, compromise, and collaborative as 3 different types of outcome. One, competitive, is win-lose. Somebody has to win, somebody has to lose. And that's not necessarily a positive outcome for everybody. One's happy, one's not. A compromise is where each person gives a little bit, very much like détente, where you really truly need to get to an end and you may not have a lot of time. So that's where you identify your priorities. What's important to you? What is important to the other person? What do they want to protect? And by recognizing each other's needs and wants, you will get to an end that will satisfy everybody. Collaborative conversations brings out a positive, almost, well, it is an energetic outcome so that everybody wins. That if you can identify everybody's priority, what are they protecting? And you're able to come to a solution that everybody can buy into and everybody feels comfortable and is accountable, has that ownership to execute the solution, then that's a collaborative win-win. And so when we're looking at preparing for difficult conversations, that is truly, truly important. And one example, it's very simple. Many of us have been involved with salary negotiation. Even if you haven't been involved with it, I'm sure you can think about the difficulties. And I know when I've had to discuss or negotiate salary, I just get caught up inside. One of the reasons I get caught up is I don't have all the information. You know, think about that. Sometimes did I ask for too much? Did I not ask for enough? What sort of questions do you all have when you're trying to negotiate salary? Just put one. I'm sure there's many. It's kind of a complex situation that we've all managed. Let's just take a moment and type into chat, what are some of your fears and threats that you want to protect, that you need to overcome if you had certain amount of information when you're negotiating that salary?
So we have responses coming up. Stuart mentioned, how do others judge my worth? How should I judge my worth?
Oh gosh, yes.
Very good question. And Arnie responded, what is the best way to resolve a difficult conversation? So I think that's a more general question, not related to this salary negotiation kind of situation. But I think what Stuart mentioned in terms of how to judge my worth, and that's an interesting question.
Oh, was that a statement, or did you want me to respond to that?
Yeah, so before you respond to that, actually two more people responded. Barry responded, misjudging your importance to the organization. And Joyce responded, how do I prove and show my value?
Wow, those are incredibly difficult conversations. And I think each of us probably have different answers. And many of us have such a high level of expected perfection that we want from ourselves. I think that's one of the reasons we discount our value to the organization and our performance, because we want to be up here at 99 to 100%. And maybe we're only doing 94 and 95% work, which is very good. It's still an A. And sometimes you need to accept B+. So if you really look at what your expectations are and what people are expecting from your work, that might be helpful. Another really helpful action that has helped me is speaking with a friend, someone you trust. And if it's in the workplace, they may be able to tell you, discuss some of the strengths where you performed well in a position, where you maybe could use a little bit of thoughtful rework, a thoughtful perspective, how you might do it differently. And they might even give you some good suggestions. If you don't have that level of trust with people in your organization and you decide to go out to a trusted friend, this is where you tell your story. You outline what happened, what you've done at work, almost in an outline format. And then as you have that discussion with your trusted friend, they may ask you more questions that will help you recognize where your strengths are that you might not have considered strengths. They might even shine some light on something that you never considered. They might say, oh my goodness, don't you have confidence? You're one of the smartest people I know. And so sometimes you do need to work with other people to validate and verify what you think your strengths are and what you believe your value is to the organization. And they will give you a different perspective, which may change yours and give you the confidence to go into that negotiation. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much, Susan.
Okay, I'm worried about the time. How are we doing? Oh, we're doing great. Are there any more questions? I think we have some time to answer them.
Yeah, actually, we have one question from Yue related to salary negotiation. Her question is, what makes a salary negotiation a win-win situation?
Well, it goes back and incorporates several of the questions that were just asked. It's when both parties recognize that you bring the same value to the organization. And of course, it would be great if what you felt you were worth and your manager and your manager's budget was able to make that happen. And that would be the ultimate. The other piece of a salary negotiation that could still be considered successful, even if maybe it was 5 or 10% lower than you wished you had gotten, is having that honest conversation so that what you believe you bring to the organization, you've been able to share that with your manager. He or she might have, or they might have received different feedback from different people, or they were looking at group work from a different perspective. And so you'll be able to open that conversation where they might see you and your work from a different point of view. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you so much, Susan. Please continue.
Excellent. So as we look at trying to determine the purpose, the priority, and the empathy, it truly comes back to considering the possible worries and fears that the other person may be having. Even in a salary negotiation, your manager may be as nervous as you are. And so thinking about that, both of you have the opportunity to jointly create that safe space by showing that you're each open to having that honest conversation, to sharing your stories, and hopefully tying them together to get to that end. And again, it's that active listening, it's that engagement to be able to collaborate that will allow you to achieve that positive outcome. And so as we come to a close, we began at the beginning saying, how do you take this difficult conversation and create positive feedback that will turn into an outcome that is win-win, that everyone contributes to that. And as we look at that iterative process, we start at the root cause, digging beneath the water, down underneath that iceberg. Explore all the opportunities so that if we look at this image here, this iceberg is a totally different viewpoint. We have some sun, we've got some reflection, where we recognize that there's different points of view, different perspectives. And then as we move forward into that action conversation, everybody takes a different role. I think several of the comments reflected that you find the right role for the right person, whether it's helping to close that difficult conversation and move it into an action conversation, or just having that story and letting everybody realize that their view of the picture is different from somebody else's view. I worked with someone who worked as an accounting manager, and he was very angry with the sales piece of the organization. And as he was describing his frustrations came back that he was measured on collecting accounts in less than 60 days. The salespeople wanted to make the sale, and in order to be competitive, they were selling terms, promising terms of 90 or 120 days. So if finance stuck to their guns, the salesperson would lose the sale. And if the salesperson stuck to their guns and offered 90 days, then the account manager got done because he couldn't meet his metrics. So once they understood that they were working against each other and not together to make the company successful, they went to the management to have a conversation about how to reorganize. So that's one example of a difficult conversation where they looked at, it wasn't just because somebody wore a blue tie and they hated blue ties. They realized what was the real cause, and then they discussed how they go back to their management and present what was causing the challenge. And they ended up both working together to jointly meet the best goal for the company. And it all comes back to taking the time to find what is that actual root cause, exploring all of the different perspectives, and then coming together to own that solution and take action. And when you think about it, it sounds like this is a very long rinse and repeat process. And it might be very, very quick if it's a small challenge. If it's more complex, it may take longer. The bottom line is the return on investment of taking that time, of building that trust, and of reaping that positive outcome that is derived because of attention being paid to perspective and feedback. And moving forward till we have that beautiful Mona Lisa, that beautiful masterpiece of a solution that everybody worked together and realized that they had different perspectives of the same goal. So at this point, are there more questions, Jenna? Where do we go next?
Yes, we do have more questions in the chat box. The first question came from Joanna. Her question is, how do you have difficult conversation dealing with family members?
Aren't those the toughest? Because when we talk about the elephant in the room and worried about emotions and people playing dead because nobody asked their opinion, and the respect that people expect and maybe don't receive, oh my gosh. You know, I think breathing is very, very good. Coming back and trying to see something from their point of view. You know, I had a friend once who was one of 4 sisters, and her mother told them, I can treat you equally, or I can treat all 4 of you fairly. And what she meant was, is if everybody got the same amount of time, the exact same color of dress, you know, whatever that treatment was, they probably would all feel like they weren't getting what they needed or wanted. But if she could address each person and approach them from their needs and wants, then she could make each child happy, and together they could come together. So, you know, that's one area I keep going back to thinking. And that helped me, you know, manage some family issues. Sometimes you do have to say, well, they are who they are, and figure out how to manage it in the moment. And the other one that I personally found incredibly freeing is forgiveness. Because often people don't realize what they're saying and how what they're saying affects you. And there are times where you can have that difficult conversation and you're able to come together into agreement and understand that you each love each other, and you'll be mindful and help people move forward. And there are other times, for a variety of reasons, that other person may not want to have that conversation. They may not be open to it. Maybe they're an authority figure in the family. And at that point, the gift of forgiveness is not forgiving them, but it's a gift you give yourself, because by forgiving them, you're lifting that burden off your shoulders. And that might even be a step to where you just, as much as you try to engage them, you continue to be frustrated. Sometimes you just have to accept that you don't get to choose your family. You get to choose your friends, but you don't get to choose your family of origin. So I think it depends on the family and it depends on the people involved. But if all else fails, use the gift of forgiveness, because we can't control how others think or speak or act. We can only control our actions. And my son is a 2-time cancer survivor. And when he was 13, he had to stand up, he had his bar mitzvah, and he said, I did not choose to get cancer, but I can choose what I do now that I have cancer. And I have a happy story. He's 27, he's a knucklehead. He has a job, he pays his own rent. So my story, fortunately, is a happy ending. What I wanted to say about that is out of the mouths of babes. He realized that he had control over his own life. He may not have control over what affected his life. And again, that comes back to forgiveness and having the confidence to feel confident about what you're feeling and knowing that what you're feeling is real for you. And just like you said, sometimes those difficult conversations, you can help others gain your perspective. And then when you can't, you just need to use the tool of forgiveness. Hope that wasn't too personal.
No, thank you. That was great. I think you already addressed some of our audience question in terms of dealing with some extremely difficult person, untrustworthy person, basically other person that has no empathy. And I think the answer is this gift of forgiveness. So thank you so much for that. I see that we have 3 minutes left, so maybe I'll just have one more question for you. And that is from Alan. Are there any tips for managers to notify salary decision to the team, or maybe in terms of team reconstruction, any type of those difficult situations?
I'm not sure if salary is a discussion that's not a one-on-one conversation. You know, I guess if sales have been down and the company is having difficulties, as a manager, you do need to communicate to the team what is going on and the steps to what the company is doing in addition to freezing salaries. But as I heard the question, I heard it might not have been meant that way, that they were asking about individual. But if the question was asking, how do you let people know that salaries may not be given or the amount of the salary may not be what you'd like to see, I think you also need to share what are some of the other actions that the company is taking so they don't feel that they're bearing the whole burden.
Great, Susan. Thank you so much. I know our audience probably have more questions, so please feel free to contact Susan afterwards. And so now we would like to thank Susan again for giving this excellent presentation on difficult conversations with positive feedback. And you can see Susan's contact information on the slide. And our host, Mark, will send a feedback form link in the chat. Please fill out the form to tell us what you thought of the program. And now you may unmute yourselves and also turn on your camera to thank Susan for this excellent session. And please let us know if you have any other additional questions or concerns via chat box. So everyone, please turn on your camera, unmute yourself.
And let me just give a great big thank you. I appreciate your feedback.
Great.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you,
Susan.
Thank you very much, Susan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do they go like this?
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. And if anybody wants to pop me an email, you can never have too many friends. So pop me an email. I'd love to chat with you.